I know it's not a common topic for a lot of you, so I'm going to try to go into depth to explain what kind of problems we're tackling and why we think we can have an impact here. So first, the general way to treat a chemistry problem is you have a continuous molecular problem, and first you discretize it in a finite basis set to reduce it to like a many-body problem of finite size. And then you use common solvers like R3-FOC or much more advanced methods to found the ground state in this subspace. But it's important to note that there are two parts that are very distinct. First, discretization of the continuous problem, then many-body solver, which is the second part is actually what most chemistry papers are working on. But here, we are mainly going to focus on the first part, which is how to discretize the problem and how to build the basis set, how to properly do this first challenge. Okay. And here, this is what we want. So here, what I'm plotting is the energy on the y-axis with a function of the number of orbitals m that we're considering. It's important to keep in mind that the more orbitals we take, the harder the computations are. So we want to have a small number of orbitals. Here it's m-1, so we want to be on the right side. The triangles I'm showing are the current standard method of chemistry resolution of this problem. And you have different kinds of basis sets that are labeled by letters to describe how complex they are. The D means that you take 2 Gaussians for every orbital. It's double zeta, etc. But basically, if you look at the blue one, you see that you get an accuracy that is quite bad compared to the others for a cost that is you have 10 orbitals. Here, the black ones is orbitals that we managed to compute with the methods we developed. I'm going to detail how we develop them later. But the important part is that there is the same number of orbitals, which means the same cost to compute the ground state, but we have an accuracy that's much better. We gain almost more than 10 milliards on the final energy, which means that we pay the same price, but we get the accuracy of much larger basis set, which is basically what we want. Okay, now let's get into the depth of what this means and how it works. So first, I'm going to detail like the physical and chemical background, what the problem is, how we formulate it in physics, and then we're going to see how we apply the QTT methods to this problem. Then we're going to see how we compute the matrix elements, how we use the QTT methods to compute integrals, and finally, what kind of algorithms we developed using these QTT objects to compute and make the best of quantic tensor trains. So let's start with the background. The problem that we're tackling is we have fixed nuclei potential. The input is we have where are the nuclei. We get 1 charge here, 8 charge here, 1 charge here, and we have 10 electrons. We want to know where they will go. So we take fixed nuclei positions, and what we want is the ground state energy of the electrons. This means that we are not adjusting the shape of the molecule. We are only considering the optimal position of the electrons. And then we get the ground state energy, which has a lot of different applications. If you consider chemical reactions, you can get whether or not a reaction will happen at such a temperature, if a reaction requires energy, is exothermic or is endothermic, will give off energy or requires energy. This has a lot of applications on real problems, but the base of everything is to compute the ground state energy of a given molecule. Then, as I said before, continuous problem. First part, we discretize this continuous problem onto a finite space using a finite basis set. We compute the matrix elements of the Hamiltonian. We'll get into that later. But then we solve the ground state in this subspace. But really, what we focus on here is the discretization part, the first part. So now we have to get into the mathematics of it a little. And this is the Hamiltonian. So, okay, it looks a bit messy, but we find all the parts that we expect. First part, kinetic part of the electrons. Then the interaction of the electrons with the nuclei, which is simple Coulomb potential. And the final term is the more complex term, which is the electron-electron interaction. Then, as we said before, we reduce this problem onto a finite basis set. So we define these CI operators, which correspond to basically placing an electron on a specific orbital. And if we reformulate this Hamiltonian in this basis set, we obtain this much simpler expression, which has a one-body term, Hij, and a two-body term, which is Vijkl, the electron-electron interaction. Then the problem, which is continuous, is simply characterized by these two objects, which is this matrix, Hij, which corresponds to the one-body Hamiltonian matrix elements. It's simply three-dimensional integrals. And then we have the Vijkl, which is six-dimensional integrals. An important part is that we need to compute these integrals. There is a lot of them, because if we have m orbitals, then you have m to the 4 elements in the Vijkl. So you compute a lot of times the six-dimensional integrals. The trick is to know how do we do this. The main way chemists have been using computing these integrals is using very simple basis sets. And simple, I mean Gaussians, because with Gaussian functions, you have a simple formula to compute each of these integrals. And with a simple formula, there is almost no computation time, and you can focus on the second part, which is the solver. However, if you look in detail, maybe let me give a few orders of magnitude before. Okay, the orders of magnitude. We care about distances and energies because we have molecules. How are they placed? What distances is? The standard distance is the Bohr radius, which is about half an angstrom. And the energies are in Hartree. Hartree is the order of magnitude of the energy of the hydrogen atom. But if you use more conventional units, it's 27 EVs or 30,000 kelvins. So it's very high. And then the orders of magnitude, like the matrix elements we will compute will be as high as 10 to 100 Hartree. But the accuracy we want, which is called the chemical accuracy, is 1 millihartree. So it's much lower than the order of magnitude of Hij and Vijkl, which makes sense, but it's still very high in terms of temperature. Like we're still aiming for an accuracy of 300 Kelvin. And even if we dare to dream, we can hope for biological accuracy, which could be as low as below the Kelvin, which means like microhartree. But in practice, this is very hard to get. We will focus here on like getting the millihartree accuracy. So then I was talking about Gaussians. I was saying like they use Gaussians because with Gaussians, everything is easy to compute. However, Gaussians, in practice, they put a bunch of them together. So here, it's just a sum of Gaussians with different standard deviation. And this manages to get a good approximation of the reality. But we know that for hydrogen, for example, the exact solution is as plotted here, e to the minus r. Like it's simple exponential. If we compare the two, there are features that are present in the exact solution that will not appear in the Gaussian approximation. First, the cusp. Close to the origin, we want a cusp, so a pointy bit. But Gaussians, even if we put a lot of them together, here it's an example with 4 Gaussians put together, we manage to have an okay approximation, but still there is no cusp. And also, and somehow more importantly, the tail will be also different because for exponentials, it's a linear tail in log, but for Gaussians, it will drop however many Gaussians you put together, it will drop quadratically in log scale. So this means that you can put a lot of Gaussians together, have a large basis set, but still the orbitals you use will be flawed and you will pay this price at some point. Then maybe I'm going to mention some things about the energy that we obtain. So here I'm showing the energy that is computed for benzene molecule. Benzene molecule, it's a ring of 6 carbon atoms, 36 electrons, you freeze 6 anyway. It's a bunch of electrons. And here they computed the energy in a basis set which has 108 orbitals. So it's already quite large. You pay a heavy price for the solvers. Here, it's really the top solvers, like UCDMRG, for example. You get very good precision. The last 3 are in very good agreement with each other. We are below the millihartree scale, so we can think everything is good, we solve this problem. However, you need to remember that when you fix the basis set, you make a crucial choice, which is restrict the infinite space of states to a subspace which is strongly determined by the basis set you pick. If we look at another molecule, here I'm simply looking at the energy for a water molecule, but I'm taking the same family of orbitals. I'm taking the dz orbitals, which is the same basis set that we used for benzene before. I'm plotting the energy as a function of the number of Gaussians. We see that for this molecule H2O, the dz has about 100 Gaussians, and we get a precision that's actually terrible. Like it's 10 to the minus 1, a bit better, but not more. What we want is 10 to the minus 3. So for this, we have to take a much larger basis set, which means that with Gaussians being a bad approximation of reality, we need to take a lot of orbitals to get an important accuracy. This means that this result we did for benzene before, we had a huge precision because the solver was very efficient, but very bad accuracy because even if we get the optimal energy for a specific basis set, compared to the physical ground state, we are far away, even in terms of energy. This means that precision is not accuracy. A way to see it in another manner is that we saw that there were two challenges. First, discretization. The choice that we make for discretization will lead to what we call basis set error, which is really inherent to the quality of the basis set. Then, the solver that we choose will lead to precision error, how close we are to the optimal state in this subspace. And the combination of these two errors get the accuracy. But to have an impact on the accuracy, you don't only need to work on precision. It's important to consider basis set error. Most works have been working on precision. Here, we're going to try and reduce the basis set error as much as possible. And we think we can get it to 0. OK. So now, let's see how we use quantic tensor trains to apply to this problem. So to do this, we have 3D functions. This means that we are using quantics. Here, I showed the discretization that we are using. We are grouping the directions together. So all the x, all the y's, all the z's. I wrote the explicit formula for the quantics discretization. It's the same as usual. If you're not used to it, you can see it using this binary tree. Like the positions are mapped to their coordinate in this tree. This means that you count how many times you go left and right, and then the endpoint will be labeled by the coordinates in this binary tree. Then you need to construct the functions. To build the MPS, we will use the tensor cross interpolation algorithm. Here, I'm plotting the interpolation error as a function of the bond dimension. And this is for a bunch of useful functions. Here it's e to the r, it should be e to the minus r, and minus r squared. There is a slight mistake. So I'm showing that for e to the minus r, the exact solution, e to the minus r squared, the Gaussians that have been used by chemists, but also the potentials that we are going to use. In all these cases, we managed to get a very good accuracy for bond dimension, slightly above 100. 150, we get very good interpolation for all these functions. This is good. This means that we can use MPS to interpolate these functions and then make computations at a cost that is moderately low. But then there is another question. Like we see that they interpolate well, but does this interpolation mean accuracy in terms of physics? Because what we are evaluating is integrals. So here what we did is that we use TCI to construct MPS to interpolate these 4 orbitals for the hydrogen atom. And then we computed the energy on the hydrogen atom of these orbitals and compare to the exact solution. This is an exact solvable case, so we can compare to the exact solution. In all these cases, here I'm plotting the energy in R3 as a function of the bond dimension. We see that when the bond dimension gets about to 40, we have 5 or 6 digits on the energy, which is way more than we actually need because we are aiming for 3. So this is very promising. We see that not only is the interpolation precise, it gives very accurate physical results. The physical accuracy is also important. Good. So what does it mean? This means that when we use MPS, we considerably expand the set of usable functions to compute these integrals, because before you had Gaussian-based states, now tensorized orbitals, we include the Gaussians, because we saw that Gaussians are well interpolated by TCI. We also include the analytic solution that we know, for example, for the hydrogen atom. So it's a much larger class of functions that we can use to compute the integrals. Well, okay, I'm saying you can use them, but I didn't show you how to compute the integrals. So that's what we're going to do now. We saw that we're going to discretize in QTT functions, but then how do we compute the integrals? So let's see that. There are different types of integrals. They are not computed the same way. Little reminder, you have these three integrals that are three-dimensional, like the overlap, the kinetic term, and the potential term for the interaction with the nuclei, and then the six-dimensional integral, which is the real crux of the problem. We compute them with QTT contractions. So first, the three first, which is like the three-dimensional integrals, they are quite simple to compute. You can compute them with standard MPS-MPO operations, be that MPS-MPS contractions or MPS-MPO-MPS contractions. Here I'm showing the example for the Kij term, which is the kinetic term. You sandwich the Laplacian MPO with two orbitals. The bond dimension of the Laplacian is very low, so you get very fast computations and high accuracy. Now we want to compute the Vijkl. To do this, we are going to compute the product orbitals. This is what Miles talked just before. We compute the element-wise multiplication. So here I'm using in this part a different representation than what we are used to. I call it side view representation. Okay, we are used to representing MPS like this. If you look it just from the side, you just see one blob with one leg. It's a way of representing MPS as vectors. This is going to simplify the notations a bit. And in this notation, the product orbitals, you take two orbitals and you get one, which is the product. It can be represented like this, where you apply this delta to enforce that the positions on each orbital be the same, which means that you have phi I of r, phi j of r, and the result you have is phi I times phi j evaluated on the same position. This is the element-wise multiplication. We use an algorithm that's not as good as what was introduced before. We have the K4 scaling, but it actually means that we could greatly improve our computations using these new methods. So once we compute the product orbitals, phi ij, we compute the final term, which is simply this mess. But if we look closely, we have phi ij, one product orbital, phi kl on the other side, and we just do MPS, MPS contraction with this MPO, which interpolates the 1 over r minus r prime electron-electron interaction term. So this means that we can write this Vijkl term simply as a MPS-MPO-MPS contraction that can be computed with very standard methods. It's actually very fast, and that's good because as we do this computation n to the 4 times, n being from, I don't know, 10 to 1,000, n to the 4 gets very, very big. So if we can compute them very fast, it's very good. And it also relates to the work did by, that was presented yesterday, that shows that we can actually improve this by a lot. And then, well, we have all the methods, yes?
You do, first you contract in PO and one of MPSs, and then you contract some result with the other MPS, or do it in one shot?
No, I do first MPS and PO, because then I can do it m squared times, and then I do the simplest one. Yeah. This is a simplified version. In the algorithm, I go in a slightly different order to optimize the computations. Yes. I don't do this n 4 times. So, okay, we saw how to compute all the integrals. Now, let's replicate standard computation. That's what we did here. Here, I considered LiH, which is a simple molecule, lithium and hydrogen, with a small basis set. They call it STO6G, but it doesn't really matter. It's a small basis set of Gaussians. And the goal of this slide is just to show that on the top, this is the matrix elements that I'm getting, computed using these QTT methods. And on the bottom, I'm comparing to the exact computations using the Gaussian formulas. And we see that we get accuracy that's 10 to the minus 5 R3 on all the matrix elements. So this is completely satisfactory. We get the precision that we want on all the matrix elements. Then we can use a solver and get the final energy. That's not what this slide is about. But this means that we can replicate standard chemistry computations with our QTT methods. That's great. Now, let me just recap what we do. We take the continuous problem. We choose the basis sets in the form of tensorized orbitals. We also tensorize the potentials. And we compute the integrals in this tensorized fashion and obtain this like Hij, Vijkl tensors. And then we can apply the quantum antibody solver. In practice, the solver we use is called CCSD parenthesis T, but it really doesn't matter here. Like what we focus on is the discretization part. Maybe the only thing you can remember from the solver part is that it scales as m to the 7, which means that we really want to keep n low, because if m grows too much, then the solver part gets out of hand.
Make sure you're still using the standard chemistry basis set for this computation here.
For the previous, yes. But now yes. I mean, this works for standard chemistry basis set, but actually what I'm going to try and show you now is how we can create basis sets. Yeah. Because the goal is not to replicate computations. There is no interest. Yeah. STO-CG, it was simple replication of a standard computation. Now we are going to go beyond this, and actually that's the, oh no, there is a slide parenthesis before, but I can skip it if you want. The next part is algorithms to try to optimize tensorized orbitals and construct our own basis sets, which are small but higher quality. Then again, I'm going to go back to this note just before. So, okay, I didn't go into details, but the ordering we chose for the quantics discretization, we chose what we call grouped ordering, so X, Y, and Z. There is also the interlaced ordering, which is grouping by scales. And it actually has an impact. The plot I'm showing here is the energy we get as a function of the bond dimension for different cases. I compare different orderings and also different level of discretization. What we see is that interlaced ordering is less efficient than grouped ordering, because for grouped ordering, we need bond dimension that's even less than half of it. So grouped ordering is actually the better ordering for this kind of problem. And second thing we see is that we can increase the accuracy we have by simply increasing the number of discretization steps. And here we see for n equals 20 that we get 10 to the minus 5 accuracy on the final energy, which is completely satisfactory. In practice, on other molecules, we don't get 10 to the minus 5 accuracy, but n equals 20 will be the standard that we are going to use in all the rest of the talk. Yes? I have no intuition on this. No, I mean, I really don't have an intuition on this. Yeah, Gaussian is bond dimension 10 in grouped, so this is why it's simple on this case. But on more general cases, like even for e to the minus r, it's much simpler in grouped ordering than interlaced, and then it's, I mean, it's not like exactly bond dimension 10 in grouped. So I don't really have a good intuition as to why this is. Yes?
Just the point that the answer may depend on the number of Gaussians.
The number of Gaussians, yeah, I guess so. But in practice, we're going to get rid of Gaussians soon. So, and we saw, like, the test we did was not only on Gaussians. Like, we saw that for common orbitals, including the exact solutions, e to the minus r and the 1 over r, like, grouped ordering was better overall than the interlaced. Okay, so now let's get to not the interesting algorithms, but the algorithms we developed to make use of this expressibility of these tensorized orbitals. So the first insight that we get is on this plot. Like here, I'm plotting the energy error I get of the H2 molecule. This is for H2 molecule as a function of the number of orbitals. The blue triangle is for the CCPV GZ basis set. We saw it before. It's a small basis set, but not that great. Here it has 10 orbitals, accuracy of like 10 to the minus 1 R3. Okay. But the pink curve corresponds to the best orbitals that we managed to compute in a way I'm going to tell you afterwards, but it's much more accurate at the same cost. It has the same number of orbitals, but it's almost, okay, not 10 times, but maybe 5 or 6 times more accurate at a given cost. Same number of orbitals, much more accurate. This means that if we talk in terms of like basis set error, this means that we reduce the basis set error to 0 because we think that this basis is optimal. Like these are the best orbitals for this problem. And then the error of the discretization is only restricted by what we call correlation error, which means that the only way to improve the energy we obtain would be to add more orbitals. because we are only restricted by the fact that with only 10 orbitals, we cannot account for the correlations that happen in this system. So the goal is really to get rid of the responsibility of the basis sets in the error. So let's see how we do this. And the trick to do this is to compute what is called natural orbitals. To compute natural orbitals, we use an object that can be computed once we solve the problem. Once we found the ground state, we can compute this matrix, which is called the one-body density matrix. It's like applying C Heidegger Cj on the ground state. And this matrix, if we diagonalize it, we get that the eigenstates correspond to the optimal states. By optimal, I mean they are the most occupied states. It will give us a recipe to get to the most occupied states, and the eigenvalues of this matrix will correspond to the occupation numbers. Here on the left, I'm showing the ideal case, because I think it's clearer to understand. I'm plotting the singular values, not the singular values, sorry, the eigenvalues, so the occupation numbers with respect to the number of natural orbitals. So how many we're considering? The high one are at 2 because a full shell corresponds to 2 electrons because they spin that we don't take into account. So the first states are completely full. And then as we go along this direction, we get to states that are completely empty. If a state is completely empty, that means it's not relevant for this computation. So actually you can get rid of it. And the interesting states are, the interesting orbitals or states, are these ones that are intermediate. If they are filled a little, then by considering them, we will get more accurate computations. And so this is a way to sort the orbitals by occupation number. So this is what we call natural orbitals. And what we will do in the following slides is to move to the natural orbital basis. So we simply take the diagonalization, the change of basis that corresponds to moving the natural orbitals, and we define new natural orbitals that I denote here, psi alpha. Great, and then using this natural orbital scheme to extract the optimal orbitals within a specific basis set, we will devise an algorithm to enrich a basis set. So, okay, we start with a continuous problem. We discretize it in a finite basis set. Then we compute the matrix elements. We use the many-body solver to get the ground state and the density matrix. We have the density matrix, we diagonalize it, we get natural orbitals that are optimal for this problem. In the natural orbitals, we have filled ones and ones that are very lowly filled. We discard the less occupied states. We keep the highly occupied state, and then, to fill what we discarded, we add external information, for example, from a known basis set, but you could also add from exact solutions when we know the exact solution. And so you feed in this external information to replace the lowly occupied state, and then you iterate. So this means that every step, initial basis set, compute diagonalize natural orbitals, and then you get rid of what's bad, in air quotes, and you add new information. This is a way to cover a very large basis set. For example, the ones that we had before, like the good ones, which were called 5Z, 5 zeta basis sets, that are very big. We can cover all this large basis set by feeding it little by little to the algorithm. But what's crucial is that we never use a solver on a large problem. The solver is always used on a small problem, which means that we never pay m to the 7 with a very large m. Okay? So we extract the best orbitals for this specific problem little by little, iteratively, little by little. Okay?
So your basis set is DTT basis set is also orthogonal.
Yes. Yes, you orthogonalize at every step because natural orbitals are orthogonal. Great. So now let's apply this to a real problem. Now I'm showing what we got for CH4. CH4 is the methane molecule. I'm plotting the energy that we obtain with as a function of the number of orbitals, still as m-1. So if you go in that direction, it means that we pay more for the result. What we did is feed with this enrichment algorithm the 5Z basis set, which has 311 orbitals. So 311 orbitals, we cannot compute with the solver that we are using. It's completely impossible. But we are feeding it little by little to this enrichment algorithm. And what we want is to have the best basis set with a size m equals 34. I chose 34 simply because this means that I have a basis set with the same size as the blue one. So the simple basis set defined with Gaussians, but of poor quality. I have the same size, but I have an accuracy that's much better. I gain almost 500 milliards compared to this basis set. Perfect. I gain 500 milliards compared to this basis set, but staying at the same number of orbitals. This means that more accurate, but not more expensive. That's great. And you see that I'm almost getting the efficacy of the accuracy of this one, which has much more orbitals. That's great. A second advantage, in addition to being more accurate at the same cost, is that the extrapolation is much better. And actually, it makes sense because before they were using these families of basis sets that were defined in a way to make extrapolation possible. But they had weird rules of extrapolation because you could not control the number of orbitals. Here, we can have as many orbitals as we want because when we compute natural orbitals, we can discard only what we don't want, but we can keep whatever we want. So the number is free. This means that when we compute the extrapolation, we have a lot of orbitals, and when they are completely optimized, they are the best orbitals for this kind of problem. So they have a physical meaning. Like it's not just what choice we made in the Gaussians that were fed into the basis set. They had physical meaning, which means that the extrapolation is much better. Here, it's a simple linear extrapolation. Okay, no, it's a simple linear extrapolation. And it shows that it tends actually, it's very close to what this basis set gets, which has like maybe 5 times more orbitals. So, no, not 5 times, maybe 3 times more orbitals. So we can not only be more accurate at a given cost, the extrapolation we managed to do is also much more accurate. So that's great. Now, what if we wanted to improve this basis set, but without external information? Because here we are using either, in this case, we use like known Gaussian basis sets that were developed by chemists. In other cases, I used dilated versions of the exact solutions, but this always means that we have to input external information. If we don't want to do that, then we can use a slightly alternate method, which is computing what we call the gradients. Okay, to compute the gradients, we have to write the energy once we solve the problem. If you imagine we solve the problem, we get the density matrix for one body and two body, gamma ij and gamma ijkl, and you can write the energy as a functional of the orbitals. It's like simply multiplying this gamma ij by the hij, like the one body Hamiltonian term, and the vjkl by this gamma ijkl. So this way we can write the energy as a functional of the orbitals. Like, and if we write the energy as a functional of the orbitals, the natural way, when we think about gradient and gradient descent, the way to improve an orbital is just to follow the gradient of the energy with respect to this orbital. So that's exactly what we do. Here we compute this psi I, which is the functional derivative of the energy with respect to the orbital phi I. And this, if we wanted to do line search, which we don't really want to do, but this would indicate in what direction in this function space we should go to improve this orbital. This formula looks a bit nasty, but still we can compute it with QTT methods. And instead of doing the line search and struggling with the step, what we do is that we simply feed these gradients into the enrichment algorithm as orbitals. Because what's good with these gradients is that they are actually in the orbital space. Like we just feed these gradients to the orbitals, to the enrichment scheme as an orbital. And like we sweep over the basis set, we take the gradient with respect to the first orbital, give it to the algorithm, gradient with respect to the second orbital, give it to the algorithm, etc. We do a bunch of sweeps on the basis set, and this is what we get. So here, it's the simulation results that we obtained for H2 molecule on the left and neon atom on the right. And I'm plotting the energy error that we obtain as a function of the number of sweeps. So here I do 5 sweeps on the whole basis set. At every step, I'm computing the gradient with respect to an orbital, adding it to the enrichment scheme, and looping on this. What does this show us? It shows us that here we start for different initial basis sets that are more or less good, but what we get in all cases is we gain more than 1 order of magnitude on the final energy. This means that we start from basis sets that can be good or not good, but we always manage to greatly improve the energy that we obtain simply by this self-sufficient method that simply guesses the new orbitals using the one we already have. We see, like, we can notice that we don't get at the same accuracy depending on the initial basis set. We actually understand why in most cases what's happening, and it's a bit technical, so I won't get into the details here. But it's really a validation of this algorithm. We managed to improve the basis set simply by computing these gradients and iteratively enriching. Okay, I'm done. These tensorized orbitals show a way to extend the set of usable functions for computational chemistry way beyond the Gaussians. Then with the tensorized orbitals, we can obtain basis sets of arbitrary size. We can increase the accuracy and make the extrapolations easier. We can use existing information like known basis sets or exact solutions to enrich basis sets using the enrichment scheme that I developed earlier. And finally, using gradients, we can improve basis set in a self-sufficient way, like in an agnostic manner, really to improve a basis set with no external information. So thanks a lot for your attention. And now if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, thanks a lot and perfect timing. So we have questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. Maybe I start with a naive one. People attempted recently the fully grid-based computations for quantum chemistry when you don't have orbitals, you represent your density on a grid. So I guess my question is, if you can tensorize, why you choose to tensorize orbitals rather than the target of the computation, which is density?
It's a very good question. I didn't see these attempts to get rid of the basis set computations. I'm not sure what to answer. Maybe, I wasn't aware of this kind of resolutions. I don't know what potentials our methods could have in this direction. I don't know. I'm going to look into it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Maybe these are DFT, no? Okay, here we are talking about much more accurate methods with correlation.
So these are like couple clusters.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So if you increase, so the basis set should be sort of used for a wide range of molecules, right? And so how you it's like in machine learning when you have like trained tests. So if you enrich for one type of, so how do you basically understand that your enrichment works? So you have some fixed set of molecules, or you have orbitals for each atom. So how you do that?
Yes, a very good question. So it's true that the general way of solving things was to develop general basis sets that would work for a bunch of molecules. Here, it's not the same approach that we are doing. The basis sets that, like the optimization that we are operating, is really tailored to a specific problem. So it means that instead of picking in a family of basis sets that works for a bunch of problems, you take an initial basis set that's not too bad, and then you optimize it to get a basis set that's optimized for this specific problem.
Yeah, but have you tried, for example, this enriched basis set just for similar maybe molecules?
Actually, when you optimize for one molecule and try to shift molecule, it doesn't work very well. One thing we did was optimize for an atom. For example, H, we know the exact solutions. If you take the exact solution for H and apply them to H2, that's exactly what I did here, actually. Apply them to H2. This is the orange curve. First point is you take the exact orbitals of H and try to solve H2 with it. It works terribly. The error is very big because you don't account for possible, like when there's two H together, it's much higher in between than outside. And so the result will not work. However, with this gradient improvement scheme, you manage in a few steps to get from this point that had a lot of interesting information, but was not put to good use because it was...
for this example, how many orbitals?
10, I didn't detail. This is for 10 orbitals for H2 and 14 for neon.
Okay, so you take 10 orbitals from H, you create a basis set from H2, it doesn't work, and then you improve
You improve it, yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Nice talk. So I'm a big fan of this work, and I had a question about like a conversation I had with a chemist, and I was telling this chemist about the work, and I said, I think this is really, a great direction. But their comment to me was, they said, the Gaussian framework is really hard to beat because it's just so fast. I think that was the comment. Or like, you could just do the integrals so quickly, and then in really complicated molecules, you might have just so many integrals to do, and so on. So I was curious if this was something that you were concerned about, or are you thinking about like getting the prefactors down, or do you think it's not an issue maybe because you can reduce the number of orbitals so much, or how do you view
It's
that
true that
question?
when I show the replication of the LIH computation, we are much slower because we don't have formulas, so we take time. Much slower. We take a few seconds, they take instant because they don't need time. However, because we managed to get much more accurate orbitals, so we lower the number of orbitals. Also, it's because in their scheme, the time is all concentrated in the solver part. And the solver part is only dependent on the number of orbitals. The goal we have is that we get good orbitals, not too much. Then we can get a very advanced solver in which the time of the solver will actually dwarf the time to compute the orbitals. This means that it's true that it will not work for every molecule. But I think there is a sweet spot where we need to have high accuracy, high precision solvers to get interesting features, like benzene, for example. And then the computation time of the integrals, we hope that it will be dwarfed by the solver time.
Because are you saying you need to go to high accuracy solver because now the basis set can deliver the accuracy, so the solver has to match that accuracy?
Yes, we can deliver the accuracy and not at the price of having an insanely large basis set.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions, comments?
Did you have issues with?
I'm a bit curious whether the algorithm is always stable because it's a self-feeding loop that I could imagine goes to garbage.
So the enrichment one is quite stable. The gradient one, there are some issues that we had to solve, especially because when computing gradients of 1 over r, you get into singularity issues, but we managed to solve most of them. So, from the examples we tested, we get quite stable algorithms. Like these, that's why I'm showing like different basis sets. Like you start from different things, but still you converge. You don't converge to the same thing. We think we understand why. Maybe I can mention why. Like here, for example, I'm comparing this Gaussian-based basis set and this exact-based basis set. The reason we think that here it's not as good as the orange one is because when you get Gaussian-based, they drop quadratically. So you can imagine as having a very small support, which means that even with gradient techniques, you will not be able to extend the support. So there are some limitations, but I think it's relatively stable from what we saw. Then it's all about trying new molecules, and that's the direction in which we're heading.
So looking into the future, what size molecules do you think you would be able to address with this?
So our goal is benzene. I think it's okay. It also depends on the computational technique that we use. For example, the talk before about the element-wise products being much faster, this will change a lot of things for us. The talk to show that we can get VIJKL much faster, it will change a lot of things for us. So we hope that we are able to tackle benzene. That it's a matter of optimizing the algorithms, the chain. And benzene has 36 electrons, and the small basis set has 100 orbitals. So we hope to tackle this kind of order of magnitude.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, then I suggest we wrap up. Thanks again.
Thanks.